Hi guys, this is lesson number 6 in the series on the 8th programming language. This is the second time I record this lesson because there were breaking changes in versions 16.02 and 16.03 of 8th. The term class is deprecated and replaced by the term namespace. By default, words and variables are now stored in the namespace user. The namespace CLS : is gone because it was associated with the term class, and now for namespaces we have the specific namespace called NS:. When we talked about operators in the previous lesson, that doesn't mean anything special. Operators are just 8th words, but the term operator is known in other languages and may be familiar to you. Now a little word on data types. So far we have only used integers, whole numbers. You can see there are a lot of representations possible for numbers. For example, you can have negative numbers, you can have the dot for floats, you can have the E for scientific notation, upper or lowercase. You can have integers, you have 3 different types of hex numbers, 0x followed by 2 hex digits, that's hexadecimal. And upper and lowercase x is possible. Also, when you start a number with $, it will also be interpreted as hex. Octal numbers must be started with an ampersand, binary numbers with a %, and when you have a number starting with the hash sign, it is always a decimal based number, even when the base was set differently. Strings are enclosed in double quotes, and as is the fact in other programming languages as well, the backslash is an escape character for the double quote, the alarm, backspace, form feed, new line, carriage return, tab, vertical tab, hex character or Unicode. Of course there are more data types, but we'll talk about them later. Okay, what's a namespace? A namespace is a separate space for names. What does it mean? Well, for example, when you define a word called, for example, print, and you put that word in your own namespace called Bob, then there can be also a word called print in a namespace called John. That's what namespaces are. When you create a word or a variable and you don't explicitly say into which namespace it should go, it goes into the namespace called user, which is the default namespace. Okay, 8th also has a lot of default namespaces. For example, the namespace n is reserved for numeric things. So the plus, minus, asterisk words are all defined in the n namespace. And in fact, you should write n:+, n:-, etc. because it is coupled with the namespace. It's very important to realize that we now can also create a word called plus in another namespace, and in fact 8th has done this. For example, with the s:+ word. S is the string class, and s:+ happens to mean string concatenation. So The same name for a word but in different namespaces. It's nice to already have a look in the manual and look up all these different namespaces and what they represent. You as a developer may freely add new words to existing namespaces. However, be careful, because 8th can change things in such namespaces in new versions, and that could be disastrous when, for example, the developer of 8th might use a variable name or a word name which you defined yourself. So please don't do that. You as the developer may also freely define new namespaces and create your stuff in that. That way you have a very nice separation from your stuff with the default 8th stuff. And namespaces in fact are a kind of having local variables in 8th, because local variables are not present otherwise in 8th. At this moment it's good to have a look at how we can print things. And printing is done by the dot word. So for example, in the first line of the example we have the string text and we print it with the dot. But what you see is then that the prompt is glued right after text. That is because the dot doesn't create a new line. For that purpose there is the word CR. And in the second example you can see that everything is nice now. So we need that for an example of how we can look up the representation of a namespace. Well, you can use the greater kind word to look up the namespace of something on the stack, on top of stack. So for example, for a number we get the result 1. So the number 1 represents the N namespace. For a string we get the number 2. So the number 2 represents the S, or the string namespace. Okay, that concludes our lesson for today. When you want to learn more about 8th, please go to 8th-dev.com. Also, there is a blog which contains the lesson of today, so you can read it. It's the 8thevangelist.blogspot.nl. Thank you for now.